to share remembrances of his very special comrade, Key Martin. I would like to extend special greetings to Comrade Key's family, especially Estella and Tamara, who are expected to attend tonight, along with some of Key's co-workers and lifelong friends who have taken the time out to join us this evening on this very sad occasion to honor the life of an extraordinary revolutionary and leader of our party. Before we begin the memorial, we want to announce that a public memorial for Key has been tentatively set for Saturday, May 20th. That's Saturday, May 20th. There are a number of branches who are organizing their own memorials, and we have learned that Key's co-workers at Time Warner, as well as the striking newspaper workers in Detroit, and this strike was very close to Key's heart. They're also planning memorials as well. But the main thing that we want comrades to mark your calendars, and the friends and the guests who are here, Saturday, May 20th will be the public memorial for Key, and the venue for that memorial will be announced at a later date. Okay? In fact, Comrade Key's family is walking in now. I'd like to welcome them. Also, Key's son Alejandro is also in attendance tonight. Okay. Okay, there will be a couple of opening remarks to begin this memorial. The first one will be by Comrade Deirdre Griswold.
Friends and comrades, I'm really only going to make a very few points about Comrade Key Martin tonight, although there's really so much to say about someone who accomplished so much. But the time is short, and this meeting especially, we want to give all the comrades who want to speak a chance. First of all, Key was one of those people who really turned the tide of reaction in this country in the 1960s from what it had been in the crushing period of the 50s. And he did it by being up front in all the battles against the Vietnam War, against racism. And these struggles really ushered in a new movement. I'm sure if we were to add up the demonstrations that Key helped to organize over his lifetime, it would be in the thousands. And I know everybody here must have walked countless picket lines with him and taken to the streets, too, many times. But unlike many of the other young leaders of that movement, who Key knew personally, he recognized that to sustain the struggle, there has to be a working class party based on communist principles, those elaborated by Marx and Lenin and other great leaders. His parents had been members of the Communist Party, and he respected their dedication and their commitment to socialism. But he knew that the CP in that period criticized the radicalism of the new youth and was still hoping to turn back U.S. imperialism's aggressive war drive by appealing to the bourgeois liberals in this country. Key's answer was to join a party that thrived on militancy and stood clearly and firmly with the revolutionary movements around the world and here at home. He quickly became the national leader of Workers' World Party's youth arm, Youth Against War and Fascism. Now, the ruling class of this city knew very well who he was, and they set their dogs on him. He was constantly getting arrested by the Red Squad, including by one cop who later turned up as one of the Watergate burglars, named Tony Ulasewicz. I doubt if Key ever bothered to send for his FBI files, but they must be huge. Second, Key withstood pressures that proved too much for many others in that movement, including time in jail. He was arrested many times, but the time that he served the most in jail for was for trying to attend the court-martial of an anti-war soldier, Andy Stapp. I visited Key in federal prison then, where he was serving 6 months. Behind all those steel gates and bars, he was the same light-hearted, joking person as when he went in. Third, Key was able to make the transition to a new period when the radical movement of the 60s and 70s waned. His temperament, as anybody who knew him realizes, was that of an activist through and through. He had to be where the action was. And in his youth, that was with the anti-war forces and the liberation movements, like the Black Panthers and the Young Lords. But in the 1980s, he took his energy and his activism and dedication into the workplace, where he soon became a trade union leader as Newspaper Guild chapter chair at the great megalopolis media giant of Time Inc., and a union bulldog in contract negotiations and fighting grievances. This was at a time, the 80s, when the international struggle that he felt so keenly about was suffering great setbacks. U.S. imperialism's main Cold War strategy, which it pursued over many decades, of driving a wedge between the two socialist giants, the Soviet Union and China, had succeeded. That affected all the liberation movements and great parties like the Communist Party of Indonesia, which was to be crushed. Within China, which under Mao Zedong had championed revolutionary theory, there came a turn to the right. And all of this derailed many of the militants who had become political at the same time that Key had. Their dream of winning a more just world suffered. Many of them pulled back from revolutionary politics altogether into community work, or they left the movement even. But Key's deep ties to this party, which had for so many years truthfully analyzed the problems of the socialist countries without dismissing their great achievements, that kept him solidly grounded. Here I should mention that Key did a great deal of work to help Comrade Sam Marcy, our chairperson and founder, gather materials for his writings on perestroika and on the Gorbachev period that led to the tearing down of the Soviet Union. And Key was very instrumental in that work. Now, a setback is a setback, and you can't get away from that. But not to recognize what it is much worse. Those who thought that the tearing down of the Berlin Wall was a great step forward cannot explain the horrendous conditions for workers, for women, for national minorities in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union today as imperialist corporations march back in. And not understanding can lead to demoralization. But Key understood, and he was not demoralized. He knew it meant that the struggle of the workers right here against the most powerful and predatory imperialist ruling class of all was becoming more central to the resolution of the world situation. And he found new ways to express his dedication to the working class, to the oppressed. I saw how his fellow workers at Time felt about him at Key's retirement party. Was it last year? They loved him for giving so much of himself in the day-in, day-out struggles with the bosses. I'm sure that the joy he got by fighting that boss was infectious, too. With Key, the class struggle was fun. Whether he was organizing guild workers to help the Detroit newspaper strikers, or whether he was making links to militant trade unionists in other countries, like COSATU in South Africa. And when he set up the People's Video Network, he tapped into another area where creativity intersects with politics. He obviously enjoyed tremendously the work he did in this new medium, and he enriched the whole progressive movement while doing it. I want to add one final point that I'm sure is on everyone's mind. Key Martin should not have died. His death was a great shock to all of us. Even though he had suffered from asthma for many years, he should have had much more time to give to everything he believed in and to spend with the family he loved so much. Capitalist medical practice, is highly flawed by the profit motive, as we all know. Nevertheless, life expectancy has increased dramatically, and Key was still relatively young, only 56. Key was taking medications for asthma that concealed his debilitated condition. He only discovered recently that he had congestive heart failure. His heart couldn't pump enough blood to keep him healthy, and that aggravated his breathing problems. But the steroids he had taken and continued to take made him feel strong enough to do things he really shouldn't be doing. Now, Key's political sense was 100% accurate when he went to Seattle and joined in those historic demonstrations against the World Trade Organization. He saw this new young movement as similar in many ways to the one that eventually produced the revolutionary generation of the 60s. And he did our party proud in his heroic conduct there. But I wish that younger, healthier comrades had been there to lug the video equipment and dodge the tear gas canisters. I wish Key had been able to focus on getting well when it became so obvious that he was sick. I know that many comrades spoke to him of their concern about his health. Comrade Sharon, in particular, tried to help him get the medical attention he needed. For all our comrades who feel the struggle so intensely, so personally, it must be said that keeping well is also a Revolutionary Party responsibility. No matter what our age, when it's necessary to take some R&R, we must take it seriously, just the way an army does. And everyone should think, when they see a comrade who seems overburdened by work, what can I do to lighten that load? How can I take some of the weight off their shoulders? Key Martin did not live long enough, yet he got to do in his lifetime more than would seem possible from one person. Tonight, and at the public memorial coming up, we'll hear about just a small part of it. I'm confident that many years from now, a new generation of working class fighters and communists will know of Key Martin and honor his contribution to the epic struggle we are in.
We'll now hear from Sharon Eolas.
We're here tonight to pay tribute to Key Martin, to celebrate his life. As I look around at the faces in this room, I see Key's family, members and friends, old and new. For those of you who met him recently, you're perhaps picturing him out in the street with a video camera and a microphone filming for PVN, People's Video Network. But for his contemporaries in the struggle of the 60s and 70s, our snapshot was of Key in the streets, on the front lines of many demonstrations, or on the phone organizing for the next activity with his notebook. I'm reminded of an anti-imperialist demonstration when we were gathering for a march in the streets, and a comrade came running up yelling that Key had been arrested while making a phone call. Arrested by the subversive squad to stop him from leading the demonstration. This was one of many harassment arrests that we contested in courts. Key came to Yoff and workers' world with an understanding of Marxism and the class struggle. His parents had joined the Communist Party during the McCarthyite reaction of the 1950s. His parents, along with many other courageous people, black and white, had set up defense guards for a concert in Peekskill, New York, which was attacked by the right wing. This was a concert set up for Paul Robeson, who at the time was very well known and certainly, quote, by the establishment and the right wing considered a communist. Key was about 11 years old at the time, and he was at this event. By 1961, while Key was a scholarship student at Columbia University, he was looking for an organization that would put the struggle against the capitalist war and racism into practice. That's the year Youth Against War and Fascism was formed. It attracted revolutionary youth with its anti-imperialist program and militant activism. Key became the national chairperson and represented the organization at national conferences, from the Black Panther Convention in California to the anti-Vietnam War conferences and coalitions. The struggle against racism and police brutality was and still is a major part of our party's program. In 1964, during the opening of the World's Fair, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, under the leadership of James Farmer, called for a mass demonstration to stop traffic on the highways and the subway trains to the fair to protest racism in hiring and abuse of civil rights. Key led the Yoff delegation that held subway doors open to stop the trains. The police attacked those on the train for holding the doors open. Key was beaten unconscious and fell into the train. Other Yoff members were arrested and beaten on the platform after the train moved out. Over 250 people were arrested throughout that day. In 1967, after the anti-war movement had taken hold among the students and progressive movement, it began to have its impact on the GIs. Yoff was asked to come out to Fort Sill to support Andy Stapp, who was being court-martialed for having anti-war literature. He and Marianne, two Yoff leaders, spent weeks supporting the anti-war GIs and were arrested for their effort when they returned to the base after being issued bar orders, which meant they had no right to go on the base. Both spent 6 months in prison for this offense. Many of you know of Key's political contributions to Yoff and Workers' World Party. He also was a contributor to Workers' World newspaper and one of the editors of The Partisan, the magazine of Yoff. Later, he traveled to the DPRK, to Cuba, and the Caribbean, representing the party, and more recently to South Africa to work on a documentary about Chris Hani, who was a well-known leader of the Communist Party of South Africa. There are many more activities and contributions he made to the movement, but I would like to end by speaking about his devotion to Sam Marcy, the founding chairperson of Workers' World Party. In addition to all the other work he did, he found time to take dictation for Sam, to do research. He spent time fixing things in his house. He took Sam for drives in the country or to the boardwalk in Coney Island. He saw this task just as necessary as the demonstrations and other activities. There are many other comrades who can expand on his contributions, so I want to end by saying Key Martin left his imprint on the party and on the movement, and he will be missed, but he would expect us to celebrate his life and carry the struggle forward. Key Martin Presente.
There are a lot of comrades, friends, and guests who would like to share their thoughts about Key. We would like to encourage remarks to be around 3 minutes if possible. But of course, no one will be cut off after that time. But each speaker will be given a reminder of when you have spoken 3 minutes. Now, I just want to say that these first 2 chairs here and also in the back will be used to have the speakers who will be called upon 3 at a time to come up and take your seats here so we can have the program move as smoothly as possible. Now, what I would like to do now is read off a list of comrades and friends who we know would like to speak, just so we make sure you have your names. If we don't have your names, and there are some maybes here as well, please see Marcia at the front of the front over here, and she will take your name. We're not going to have people, put their hands up. So please see Marcia if you have decided to speak. That would be very helpful. But let me read off these names quickly. And they're only in alphabetical order. This is not this is not the list in the order. It's Artie, Bill Dories, Blue, Dave Axelrod, Dave Schechter, Derek, Donasian, Donna, Ellen Andors, Ellen Catt, Fred, George, Jerry, Greg Dunkel, Hillel, Jean, John Jones, Joyce Chediak, Kathy, Lucia, Patty, Paul Wilcox, Rachel, Renee, Sarah Sloan, Stephanie, Sue Davis, Steve Millies, Sue Harris, Vendora, Lori, Cliff Joseph, and Tracy. So is anybody who was left off? Brian. Okay. Okay, please see Marcia in the front, okay? Okay, so the first 3 speakers I want to call upon are Sue Harris, John Jones, and Bill Dories.
Okay. In about 1994, I came around the party, and I got involved with People's Video Network, and that started a new era for me, a totally new era in my life, and he became a very big part of my life at that point, along with Johnny and Ellen and the other members of People's Video Network staff, but Key was really one of the driving forces. We shared a tremendous amount. He got me doing the shipment for a while, which meant sending the tapes out around the country, which meant putting different logos on each tape that was going to go out in different places, and that's how I started learning how to edit. Then he got me into editing. And then we really worked on keeping a network going, keeping shows going. We worked very closely together. It was not a marriage, not a romance, but an incredible working relationship. And I guess sometimes the things that annoy you in life about somebody come back to you later as things you cherish after they're gone. I mean, there are a lot of things that used to make me mad that I actually remember fondly now, like the mess in the studio or the wiring that suddenly and inexplicably would get rewired, when you weren't looking. So these things were actually less important than Key's generosity and his organizing vision. I mean, things like, let's put some shows out in Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Let's put 8 shows out in Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Let's put stuff around the country. Well, how about 30 cities? And then there's a new one and a new one. And one example that I had more codified was how he organized so many people to attend a seminar on an editing package that he and I discussed to use for PBN. I actually spent a long afternoon when I was up in the main workshop on the phone with him back in New York, discussing this thing called Final Cut Pro and back and forth, what's the best editing package? And we ended up, after a long time, figuring it out. And when we did, as far as I was concerned, we were done. We figured out the best possible editing package for PVN. But instead of just leaving it at that, Key worked out a deal for an expert to come in and teach the technology, not only to PVN, but to a whole group of movement videographers like Lisa Chavez and Gail Walker and Joe Friendly, among many. And what started as a technical upgrade became an organizing opportunity for outreach to a lot of people. Key thought big, and he dreamed big. He wasn't great on details, but he was great on heart, and he was great on vision, and I will miss him. Key Martin Presente.
Comrades and friends, in Jersey City, even though it wasn't written, it should have been written as one of the many, many thousands of things that Comrade Key Martin has done and inspired. He was instrumental in an inspiring move to really incite and excite our local APC members to take a bold and initiative move. And I'll be very brief with this, because it was most touching and remembering of what Key contributed to Jersey City at that time. It was 1987, and the Jersey City All People's Congress was rolling red hot in the city. We had marched against the undeveloped waterfront. We had led demonstrations against police brutality. But these were marches and these were demonstrations, and we were at a time when we had a good core member under the leadership of Comrade Rachel and myself, and we were meeting every week, and we wanted to inspire our members, to really think about the next level of struggle. And it was at the time when New York City was having the days of outrage, days of rage in the city, when there were marches and they were shutting down the bridges and things of that sort. So we decided to have a meeting, and Comrade Rachel invited Comrade Key Martin to come to Jersey City, and we organized a house meeting, and Comrade Key brought along a slideshow of the history of the party and the struggle. And comrades, you know, as I know, that Comrade Key, he can get you going. When he takes on and he starts to explain the party's history and his party's role in the struggle. And he had this slideshow, and we had a room full of our new APC members and our old members, and they were riveted to this slideshow. And of course, the slideshow, as comrades know, depicted the struggles that were mentioned earlier, the struggles of the party's support for the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, the different demonstrations, the women's movement. And when our APC members saw this slideshow, and they were listening to Key as he was narrating it, it was so inspiring that after that slideshow, we immediately held a meeting, and one of our members said, his name was Jake Mincy, for those who remember Jake. Jake said, wow, he says, we really got to brainstorm. We got to do something really big. Well, we disbanded the meeting that night, and we said, okay, Comrade Rachel and myself, we went back and we thought about, well, what could we do? Well, at the time, there was a big issue of housing. And the Jersey City Medical Center at that time was warehousing whole floors. So what inspired was we suggested that we take over the 16th floor of the Jersey City Medical Center. Well, this came about, comrades, out of the sheer inspiration of Key Martin's slideshow on the history of the party. And it shows you that even with the slides, and of course today we have the People's Video Network, which is international, but it showed that from that slideshow, what Comrade Key contributed to us in Jersey City, we were successful. And we got the confidence of our members, who were all God-fearing church people, deacons, and everything else, who would never attempt anything other than a march, which was okay. But he inspired them to go another level. He said, look, if the party can do it, our history can do it, well, you're in the Jersey City APC, you can do it. And you know what? We took over the 16th floor of the medical center. And it was a deacon, it was a teacher, it was Rachel, and it was myself. But we owe that inspiration to Comrade Key. And that's just one of the many thousands of inspiring movement and ideas that he instilled in all of us. I want to say, Comrade Key Martin Presente.
I remember the first time I met Key, he was wearing a helmet. As we did that back then when we thought we knew the cops were going to try to bash our heads in. I remember the exact day and place. It was Washington Square Park, May 18th, 1968. Key was 26 years old, and he had just done 6 months in the federal pen for trespassing on a U.S. military installation, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And he was also one of the most arrested radicals in New York City at the time. Whenever there was a protest, the cops would go right for Key. In '68, I was 13 years old. I didn't like war and racism and the cops, and I'd come to Washington Square for a march by a group called Youth Against War and Fascism. And I met Key there, and he took me under his wing. He taught me how war and injustice were rooted in class society, and how it was possible to build a different kind of society without rich and poor, and without a few people owning everything and everybody else having to work for them, and without cops swaggering around, killing whoever they want, whenever they want. A society where all wealth belonged to the people who produce it, to the working class. And he taught me about revolution in Russia and China and Cuba and Vietnam, and about Marx and Lenin and Malcolm X and Huey Newton and Che Guevara. And he gave me the direction that my life has had ever since. A lot of people remember Key as a revolutionary videographer. But to Key, the camera was just one more weapon in the struggle. He was always innovating, coming up with new ideas and tactics. I think in Up Against the Brass by Andy Stapp, which I hope everyone can read, he calls him a ball of energy who never walked when he could run. He used a silk screen. He built these huge silk screens where we'd make these beautiful banners that YOF, Youth Against War and Fascism, was known for, with pictures of Che Guevara or Huey Newton and Fred Hampton. Or he devised mobile tactics we used to outwit the cops and outmaneuver the cops in the streets. Or the Saturday street meetings where we would just pick up a ladder. If there's nothing else happening, we'd pick up a ladder and a bullhorn and go down to 14th Street or 34th Street and just start rapping to people. Or the campaign against the first big subway fare increase, where we used bicycle locks to chain open the gates of the subway stations, and we let thousands of people in for free. Key coined the slogan then, over, under, around, and through. The New York subways belong to you. In 1980, I returned to New York City after spending some years in the South and started working as a temp at Time Inc. And I walked out in the hallway one day and I saw Key at the coffee machine. By total coincidence, we'd been hired almost the same day, the same floor. His department was right next to mine. And Key quickly applied the same revolutionary qualities he had used in the streets to the job. And he became almost overnight the chair of the newspaper guild at Time Inc., where he waged an unending battle to force the company to bring on staff, temporary workers like myself that it had denied security and benefits. And he negotiated revolutionary contract protection against automation-related layoffs. But mostly he won the respect and love of everyone who worked there. We have with us tonight Edith, Wilt, Dave, Erica, Peter from the Newspaper Guild at Time Inc. I can't describe the outpouring of grief that I've experienced in just the last week on the job. Not only from Guild people, but from the 32 VJ service workers who we helped during their long winter strike in 1995, or, beyond Time Inc. in New York, the reporters and pressmen and Teamsters at the Detroit News and Free Press who he helped he organized a nationwide support campaign for them in their long lockout, 3-year lockout by the Knight Ridder and Gannett newspaper monopolies, or the Daily News workers who he stood on the front lines with in their strike and their struggle against firing. Tomorrow, his daughter was born shortly after I started working there, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, so many workers have come to me this week and remembering how she used to come to work on his shoulders and how she almost grew up in the copy processing department, and she would call him her key daddy, I remember. And so many people have been talking about this all week, and they all send their love, everyone at work sends their love to you tomorrow. Finally, I want to say that Key Martin was the kindest, gentlest, and most self-sacrificing person I ever knew, a person who devoted his whole life to the welfare and betterment of others. There's a word for a person like that. It's a word that in this country is often used as a slur, but the word is a communist. And Key was a communist in the truest sense of the word. And if any of us could be a small part of the communist that he was, we can be very proud. Like his hero Che Guevara, he was also motivated by a profound feeling of love. Like Che, he battled asthma his whole revolutionary career, but he refused to slow down. Let's build a true memorial to Key by filling Madison Square Garden on May 7th, by saving the life of Mumia Abu-Jamal, whom he interviewed in prison, and by laying this horrible, rotten capitalist system to its eternal rest. That system will die, but Key Martin will live forever. I want to say, like we said in the 60s, Key Martin, live like him, dare to struggle, dare to win.
Okay, the next 3 speakers will be Ellen Catalanato, Johnny Stevens, and Dave Axelrod. Could you please come up to the front?
Key and I first met in early 1963. We were both 19 years old at the time. He was a student at Columbia University and shared an apartment on West 109th Street with my brother-in-law, Bernard, and another guy. I was speaking to Bernard last night. He said Key was the neat one of the group. He described it as like the odd couple plus one. I'm not quite sure what Bernard did, but he said the third roommate, who I won't mention his name, he's a respected professor on the West Coast, he supplied them with steaks, which he shoplifted from the local supermarket. Comrade Fred used to visit my brother-in-law, Bernard, to talk politics and tried to recruit him to the party. Instead, he recruited Key, who went on, as you've heard, to become a leader in Youth Against War and Fascism. Key was one of the group of comrades who went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to support Andy Stapp and other GIs who were organizing against the Vietnam War within the Army. The soldiers were awestruck when the comrades arrived and opened the trunk, and instead of beer or marijuana, they pulled out a mimeograph machine to issue leaflets and press reports. Out of the struggle in which, as many people have mentioned, Key did 6 months in jail, the American Servicemen's Union was born and went on to organize and influence tens of thousands of GIs with an anti-racist, anti-war, and anti-military perspective. And the demands of the American Servicemen's Union, there weren't that many women in the military at the time, included having the right to organize a union of rank-and-file GIs, as well as the right to disobey orders to participate in the illegal war against Vietnam or to be used against the black rebellions in the communities at home. You heard the story about how he was constantly arrested in those days. But no matter how many times he was arrested, he'd be back there leading the next demonstration. And I also got an email from my husband John, who's now in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, on the anniversary of the bombing there, and he wanted to add some things. He said, Key had an ease in dealing with state repression that was rare. Most people, including really brave comrades, showed wear and tear from doing time in jail. Key did 6 months and made it seem like an opportunity to catch up on sleep and reading. I remember Key had to do a few weeks in jail again a year or two later, and a comrade expressed, sympathy to Key's father. But Key's father said, and I'll never forget it, Key could do the 15 days standing on his head. Key was a revolutionary all his life. There is no greater compliment. He didn't live that long, but he lived it all in double time.
Greetings, comrades and friends. I think we should lend this honor to Key family, because Key family have lent so much to us. They have allowed me to be a part of that family. And Key made time for them. I remember he would go to the movie at 12 o'clock at night with Tamara or the hockey team and explaining sexism and the women's struggle in sports, which was great. Key would have liked the night demonstration especially, because it was against the New York Times. It was against NBC. And he often said that the time that the bourgeois press now wasn't only an arm of the ruling class, that they were a part of the ruling class. He told a story to me a lot about CNN trying to buy the World, not the World Trade Center, excuse me, comrade, help me out. It's Rockefeller Center, and how they own property. So they were this vehicle now that we were faced with. But he was careful in how he dealt with it. I remember the ABC struggle, which I wanted to especially when they hijacked the Mamiya video and made a mockery of it. I wanted to really take them on. I said, this is what PVN is for. We got to take them on. We got to take them to court. We got to have demonstrations. We got to have sit-ins. He said, no. He said, no. He said, we got to work to free Mamiya. And he said, this will set us apart from that. He said, we misdirect our energies. So he was careful in picking the struggle, even though he hated them, and he was capable. He was careful of how to take them on. I spoke to Key Friday, then Wednesday. One of his concerns was that we send a solidarity message and Presente to Kamal Wilkerson, the revolutionary soldier and fighter who the state murdered in Texas. He wanted me to tell Njeri that he had spent time in jail and that they had struck a rock there in Lucha Boulder and it will be crushed. He called for a moratorium. He wanted to fill Madison Square Garden and figured that we was capable of it, and he was looking to how to go farther. This was Key, but what I remember most of Key is his compassion, the way that he spoke. You know, like he was redefining the struggle. He would speak about workers and racism, and his compassion was so great that it dealt with the problem of everyday life, the gut feeling of what you need to reach a worker who was attacked by racism, unemployment, sexism, transgender oppression. He knew how to reach it and how to tell you how to fight and made space for you. One of his favorite stories was about Robeson and Monroe County and the armed self-defense and how you carry that out and how you bring the masses in. He always was a general, kept you arming, asking you to do 5 things, and commending you when you got one of them did. So you was able to continue. I think one of the greatest struggles that we embarked upon was a continuous struggle of the South African Revolution, and a committee of which PVN took on to go to South Africa to do a documentary on Comrade Chris Hani. In that struggle, we were accompanied by Elena, myself, and Tamara. It wasn't only a video that he was talking about. He was talking about the struggle in South Africa that was cut short by the failed Soviet Union, the defeated Soviet Union. He was talking about all the energy of the anti-apartheid movement and the many demonstrations that everyone in here was a part of that gave so much energy to trying to see a country under national oppression go forward with their struggle. He said that was cut short, and we have to find a way to continue that. And Chris Hani will be best understood because he was a communist. He wasn't only the leader of contagious, he was a communist. And people would look toward him. So we embarked upon that, but we found many other things to do. We found the question of HIV/AIDS, which Key did a video about the crisis in Africa, particularly South Africa, on the question of HIV/AIDS. But did we stop there? No, it was bringing the struggle here with ACT UP, with R.G. Lloyd, and other groups that were working around the issue of AIDS. He talked to Preston Woods and saying that the question of AIDS wasn't only not answered in South Africa, it wasn't answered here. This is a question that we have to deal with. He faced the enemy of Hobart that invaded Bosnia, that just went and had this racist meeting in South Africa, talking about a South Africa month. He told me about those enemies that he met a long time ago, and he faced them again. Those are the many things that I remember about Key Martin. But I think what he would like most, and with PVN, a video network, a medium that he created and guided and thought about constantly, that he said PVN was a medium, that it was a fraction of the party paper to really get the voice out and to articulate it. He talked about WBAI, he talked about Paper Tiger, he talked about multimedia. But one of the things he did was really raising the struggle of Mamia Abu-Jamal by having a satellite link up with this multimedia issue, along with the posting, along with the everyday campaigning. So it wasn't just a media network that he was talking about. And he tied the whole media network to the party. Often he commended Deirdre, John Catt, because when we started, Monica Moorhead, all these people was a part of PVN. He commended the people who just had programs, or who, like Ruben, who took the tape down to the studio. Everybody was mentioned in all his analogy of what PVN is. And we have a great organization, but it wouldn't be possible without the party. I would say finally, that what Key Martin wanted most of all was people to join a working class party like Workers' World. Viva Key Martin. Viva Chris Hani. Viva Workers' World.
A member of Key's family, his son Alejandro, wants to speak now. After Alejandro, we're going to have Sue Davis and Greg Dunkel. Alejandro.
You know, I'm here to speak about the love, you know, above the politics. I mean, let's put that to the side for a second. Let's talk about the love. I mean, Key would make everybody feel loved. I mean, I don't care who you were. I mean, I have friends who are heartbroken, and we all feel a dull ache. You know, it's like the steaks. When I first met Key, when my mother first started dating Key, we went to Key's house when he lived with Hillel on some loft. And Key made steaks. I don't know, I mean, in our family, we don't eat rare steak. I mean, you know, it just doesn't happen. I mean, and so I'm sitting at the table, and my mother strategically put me next to her, and Key poured out these steaks, and I cut into my steak, and it's bleeding. And I told my mother, I'm not eating that. So my mother pinches me. So, I mean, these are the things about Key that I remember. I remember the bloody steaks. I remember, you know, I remember falling asleep at the back of meetings. You know, I mean, you know, this is the Key I remember. You know, I remember this Key, my little sister. That's my little sister back there. It's Tamara. My dad was gone. You know, I think I met Key when I was 8. And he was different. I mean, it was just... Key was a bunch of things. And it was like Johnny getting on him about his car. I don't know if anybody remembers the Beetle. Does anybody remember the Beetle? Key had a Beetle when we first met Key, and you had to lift the back seat to turn the car on. And you were the one talking about the car, and you were talking about how Key threatened to Joe Johnny out. I don't know if a lot of people here remember Mark Dennis, Bob's son. You know, I owe that to Key. You know, my best friend in this whole world is Mark, and I met Mark through Key. Well, one day we went to the beach, and it must have been about 20 of us in the car, and we start ragging Key about his car. I mean, we always ragged Key about that car. But see, the thing is, he kicked us out. I mean, he kicked us out, he drove off, he came back and he got us. You know, but, you know, we continued to rag him about the car. And, you know, the van, it had this Coca-Cola crate behind the seat. I mean, if you didn't get to drive in that van, I mean, you were missing something. You were missing a part of Key. I mean, 'cause that was the embodiment of Key. That was Key. Those broken down cars, you know, that he would continue the movement in. You know, my first demonstration, well, not my first demonstration, I'm sorry, I have to credit that with my mother. But my first trip to Washington was with Key. You know, how many people from East Harlem, you know, 10 years old, take off to Washington for the day? I'm not gonna lie, I used to leave the demonstrations and I would go to the Smithsonian. But Key was cool with that. I mean, because I was learning something. Another thing I'm gonna always remember about Key, and I'm never gonna forget this, it's if you had any question about anything, Key had the answer. You know, my friends would call me and ask me to ask Key questions. And, you know, there was a string there where I would ask Key, I don't know, maybe 20 questions straight, and he knew the answer all the time. I'm like, no, this can't be. He can't know all the answers. So I looked it up. Key was right. I've never looked up. I've taken everything Key says as it's coming from the burning bush. And there was a lot of love. You know, Key was just love. I mean, he was a special individual, you know, and I'm glad he came across me, you know, and, you know, let's remember the love. You know, some people said that he was black, that he was a communist. Above all else, he was human. I mean, he was just human, you know, and it's, you know, everything of Key, that's the one thing I strive to be, is human. I mean, I never met a person that didn't like Key. I mean, how could you not? I mean, the jokes. Oh, yeah. I mean, these had to be some of the worst jokes. I mean, they were bad. But he didn't care. He didn't. She was talking about his red suspenders. You didn't see the paisley suspenders. The striped shirt with the paisley tie and the suspenders. I remember telling someone once that he wasn't hip. That's not true. He was hip. And you know what made him hip is that he didn't care. It was like he was all right with him. And that was cool. And it's like, and that's beautiful. It's beautiful for people to be all right with themselves. And Key was all right with himself. I'm going to miss the times. The people who've lived with Key will know. You don't need to go to a library if you want to look up some old newspaper article. You can come to our house. And he would save everything in the Times, the art section, sports section, living. It didn't matter. It was the Times, and it's funny. I'm just going to miss him. He was a beautiful human being.
Also, one of the leaders of work fairness, Tracy Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. To the family, we wish from Work Fairness to extend our deepest condolences. Key was a friend and helped to organize our organization and was there for any rally that we had, participate in any way he could. Sleep on, brother. Take your rest.
Comrades and friends, the first time I met Key was in October 1966, when we leafleted during the evening rush hour in Herald Square. We were passing out a leaflet urging people to vote no, I've still got the button, on a referendum that opposed a civilian review board overseeing the police. The issue was tricky because of the racist way the referendum was worded. Yes, it's the same issue of making the police accountable to the community that persists today. I learned all the things I needed to know about Key that night. His unflagging energy and enthusiasm for the class struggle, his determination and persistence in fighting the class enemy, and his delight in making wildly, truly, horrendously bad puns. I remember being amazed at how fast he got out leaflets, all the while talking a mile a minute, cajoling people to think about the issues and oppose racism. He set quite an example, which made it a lot easier for me. I was very intimidated. This was the first time I'd ever done anything like stand on a street corner and hand out leaflets about a controversial issue. But Key, with his combination of revolutionary zeal and his silliness, put me immediately at ease and made handing out leaflets seem like the easiest, most natural thing in the world. Then he invited me back to the party's first loft on 21st Street for dinner with Mary Ann and some of the other comrades. That's when I got an earful of those lousy puns and learned that being a revolutionary isn't a totally grim, high-minded, serious business. You could have fun and be a dedicated socialist. The revolutionary example Key set that night was so typical of him. He always worked the hardest, did the most, pushed himself to the limit, whether it was making placards or banners by hand with brush and ink, or running the rickety mimeograph machine that was always breaking down. Now, I just want to explain to you that those of you who do not know what a mimeograph machine was, it was a very primitive way that we used to reproduce leaflets before there were Xerox machines. Key was truly a leader, not just in words, which he uttered as chairperson of Youth Against War and Fascism, with such eloquence at all the demos and street meetings during the 60s and 70s, but in deeds. Though he was the chair, he didn't leave the work to others like some armchair radicals. He always did whatever was needed, dragging signs back to the office after a demo, emptying the garbage, or going to night court to get a comrade out of jail and then taking them out to dinner afterwards. And he always did everything with gusto. He wanted the revolution so much that he put everything he had into every moment. He applied his politics in a practical, hands-on way. He got the job done. He was truly a worker in the sense that he worked hard every day of his life to overthrow capitalism. And it was his rock-firm commitment to socialism, as Fred talked about, that helped build Workers' World Party into the fighting force it is today. Armed with the first-hand knowledge of the power of big business media to shape people's opinions, especially after working for 20 years at People magazine, Key saw a way to expose the truth about capitalism by setting up the People's Video Network. Take that, Time Warner. Key projected revolutionary optimism. If there was a setback or a problem, he always tried to find the silver lining, the way to, or I should say the red lining, the way to turn the situation around, to use the circumstance to revolutionary advantage. I think Key's optimism came to him naturally. That's just who he was. But when he added personal discipline and unswaying dedication to the working class and the oppressed, that combination made Key a powerful, charismatic leader. I know I would have followed him anywhere after leafleting with him that night, and I have. He became to me like a brother, and I will sorely miss him. As chair of YOF, Key had a highly visible role in the progressive movement. He spoke forcefully, persuasively, articulately against racism, about the imperialist war against Vietnam, about all the ills of capitalism. He shone in the struggle, and the light of Marxist analysis, class truth, and dedication to building Workers' World Party and its vision of a socialist future was very bright indeed. You could say Key was a brilliant star in this constellation of stars that make up Workers' World Party, and his light will continue to shine brightly through all who knew him, who were inspired and motivated to join the struggle because of him, and through his many accomplishments. I tried to think of a bad pun, but I couldn't come up with one. So I'll just leave you with this thought. The next time you hear one, think of Key and remember his warm, hearty laugh. We're going to make the revolution, Key, in your name and with profound thanks for your shining example. Long live Key Martin.
Comrades, I knew Key Martin for decades. He was a good comrade and my best friend. My daughter was born 6 weeks after his, and she would have been liked to have been here tonight, but she's 2,000 miles away, and it was just too much to come. I want to express my sadness about Key. And as I was thinking about how to sum up these decades, of course I knew that wouldn't have the time, I thought about a conversation that I had with Key Martin in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And there had been a talk at the conference that we were attending about the impact of Haiti on the United States. How Haiti had had such a big impact and such a big influence on the United States. And we were talking about, it wasn't just Haiti, Key said, but it was Africa. And I said, yeah, we talked about this, and he said it's just not on the society and the culture and the history and the struggle in the United States, but it's on our individual struggles. And he said, now remember, Greg, how the collective that you were in met Workers' World Party, because you handed out a leaflet in support of the Black Panther Party at their first convention. So that's what I'm going to try to talk about just a little bit. And then I have one very brief thing at the end, is that's the way that the Mother Bloor Collective met Workers' World in that struggle. And then there was a second convention that when we had sort of joined Workers' World Party, after a whole political process, discussion, etc., there was a second Panther convention, and Key came down to help us organize it. And it wasn't just to help us organize it, it was help to solidify it, to take a group of students. Even though I'm 3 years older than Key, I was a student compared to him at that time, and perhaps even now. But he explained how you would build the party by reaching out to the masses. And he explained how to reach out to the masses. You would go, you would leaflet, and you would do poster pastering and various other things. At that time, Washington did not need a mimeograph machine. We had several presses, including the press that the Black Panther Party was using. So we started building this, and I'm not going to talk about, just one little incident. Me and a guy named Dick Oakes, whose name I'm going to use because I know some people here know him, were out at the University of Maryland postering up for material support for the Panthers, give them food and money. And it was late at night, and the campus was deserted, and then all of a sudden, Dick Oakes saw the cop cars come screeching up, and the cops come running off, and we duck into this building, and we're up on the second floor listening to the cops. And I remember this, and I'll remember this as long as I could. And it describes what was happening then. The cops were saying over their walkie-talkies, "Proceed with extreme caution. Panthers are poster pastering on the University of Maryland campus." Well, we got away. We put up more posters as we left, and we sort of waited for a half an hour or so. But that was the spirit of Key, was in that kind of struggle that we could take it on. And he helped build the Washington branch, and three of the people that joined the party then, Patty, me, and Peter in Chicago, are still in the party after 30 years. And that is an accomplishment that he could do. And after I came to New York, and I was very glad that John talked about this because I was planning on, he said, you have to reach out to the masses, but you just can't say words. You have to have images. And he said, Greg, you have some technical skills as in the dark room, and let's make a party slideshow. And for 2 or 3 years, I made maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000, maybe more slides of all these demonstrations and stuff that the party had taken on, struggles and historical struggles. And it was so great that John, said that 10 years after I started working on that, it really led to a struggle that I participated in because I was living in Jersey City. And it comes around, and we're going to remember this. We're going to remember this, and I'm going to remember Key for the rest of my life. And he made a big contribution to me, a big impact on me. And he was so concerned about Africa. That's the other thing. On his deathbed, the last time I saw him and talked to him, he wanted to know, was Workers' World going to cover the floods in Mozambique, and I said, yes, we had covered it. And I think that he made a contribution, and even though his Volkswagen left me stuck at Rikers Island, and I had to get him towed, I'm still going to remember him with great fondness and a lot of sadness. Thank you.
That we can all be together here tonight, Estella and Hondo and Tamara. It's an especially wonderful moment to get to share all of us together. We've spent so much of our lives together. And as a gay person who has fought for the understanding that our chosen family is as dear to us, as valuable and important to us as blood relatives, I know whenever I would see Johnny and Key together, I'd say to myself, that's family. I wanted to raise a particular aspect of Key Martin, and that was his relationship to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender question. It's a social question, but Key had a particular way of relating to it. I thought after his death about the fact that whenever I would be at an event that we would hold for the lesbian, gay, bi, trans community, that people would come up to me and say, I work with Key. I'm a friend of Key's. Key's a friend of mine. And he fought for my domestic partner benefits at work. He fought for my bereavement days when I lost my partner. And I thought, well, you know, you didn't hear Key make big speeches about the lesbian, gay question, but it was how he in particular related to people, and it was something I thought back to when I first met Key as one of the younger generation in the party. I didn't meet Key till 1973. And I had moved here from Buffalo to be in the streets. And there were demonstrations every day. There weren't just one demonstration a day. There were a lot of demonstrations every day. And I thought I was going to be in the streets, but I spent a lot of my time on the floor at the headquarters at 21st Street, just making banners on that long hallway on the second floor to go to the next demonstration. And one day Key came up and asked me, how you doing? And I said, well, you can see how I'm doing. You know, I had a lot to do. And I said, you know, Key, sometime I want to ask you more about the Chinese Revolution. I have a lot of questions about it. He said, well, what kind of questions? I said, well, you know, later on we can talk, but these are some of my questions. And that is when I learned that Key had no concept of what the word later meant. He only lived. He squeezed every drop out of the present. And so Key sat down on the floor with me. And 5 hours later, he was done talking to me about China in our first installment. And so I got up to leave, and he pinned me with that handshake. You know, he could nail you with that handshake. He grabbed my hand. You know, you start to leave, and if he's not done with you, he still has your hand, you know. And I thought, oh no, he's going to open up another subject. I couldn't take in anymore. My mind was just reeling with all this great stuff he had taught me. And he said to me, it's not enough just to join the party. That's just the beginning. You can be for the party. You could be loyal to the party. You could agree with what the party's fighting for, and you can be out there fighting for it. But it won't automatically make you a communist. You got to study Marxism. He said, you know, you want change, then you've got to understand the laws of development and transformation that affect change. You have to study dialectical materialism. And you're not automatically going to get it just being out in the streets at a demonstration. And you can't bear your oppression in the present and you want to get to a future without oppression, then you have to understand the laws of motion and development of human society in history that led you to the present and what it's going to take to transform society. You have to study Marxism. And you know, all these years later, I can remember what I thought when he left. I thought, this guy takes me seriously. Here I am, a young trans person who is disrespected in every quarter of society, who can't get taken seriously. And if I am taken seriously, it's somebody wanting to talk to me about my oppression. And Key just came up and talked to me like you'd talk to anybody else, like he'd talk to anybody else. But he told me there was room for me in this party. And that if I grew and developed, there was room for me in the leadership of the party. He taught me that lesson just in those parting words. But you know, as important as that lesson was, what it's turned out 27 years later is that the best lesson they taught me, or is still teaching me, is to study Marxism.
I am so going to miss my friend in the red suspenders. When I started coming around in 1995, I was drawn in by a talk that I heard over at Cooper Union by Gav. But it was Key Martin that I ended up spending the most time with once I got ensconced in International Action Center. Key was there almost all the time, and I was there late, and our hours just kind of coincided, and Key was always there. It was just such a comfort always to know that if he wasn't there then, he wouldn't be much longer coming in and staying. I've heard folks mention steak. I'm not quite sure. There must have been some sort of come down in finances, because I remember potatoes. How Key and Johnny would throw a handful of potatoes into the microwave to nuke them so they could jump in that van and head off someplace, sometimes very far away, to go and shoot what was happening, the latest things that were happening in the struggle. I remember the night that they left for Detroit on the newspaper strike, bag full of potatoes and the cameras and tripods strapped on. Key, I think, was the one who really, really taught me what labor was, what really the idea of labor having its own struggle was about. I remember that I was lucky enough to be part of the PV and contingency for a democracy and media convention out in California. And by the second day, Key was just outraged because there was no labor workshop. And by the afternoon of that second day, Key had gotten together a labor workshop, which we held out in the hallway outside of some of the main rooms, because there was no place else to hold it. But Key knew that there could be no Congress of media without some sort of talk about labor. He was just a font of information, as everyone has before me has come, and people who have known him for years. I remember being chugging along in the van, going home, where he was so nice to be dropping me off on his way home. And almost every street that we could ride down, Key had a story about a demo that happened there, or a picket line that happened there. And one time we were driving by 100th Street, which is not too far from my house, and Key said, "Oh yeah, and I remember that we had all these demonstrations around here." And I said, "Well, what year was was that? And he said, oh, that was, and I said, well, gee, I don't remember anything like that. And I was right around in the neighborhood, but that just goes to show how close the movement can be to you, and you miss it. But nevertheless, Key obviously didn't miss a thing. I remember the last demo that I saw Key at. It was the Malcolm Ferguson demo. And he didn't come up with us. I'm not quite sure when he actually got there. But I remember walking down this dark Bronx street and taking a look over there, and there was Key standing on something, video camera going. And I wanted to smile at him because every time I ever saw Key somewhere, I always wanted to smile at him. But I didn't smile at him because he's holding a camera, and knowing the gravity of the situation that we were there for stopped me from smiling. But I hope my lips turned up just enough where he could see that I saw him and, was sending a hello of solidarity. Key was always full of love. He was helpful. He was passionate. He was compassionate. He was thoroughly generous, as everyone knows, but I just want to add my little 2 cents. Somehow up to the last day or so, we just really didn't think that we'd lose our Key. But with all the things that he had suffered with, I guess it may have been just the thing that had to happen, but heavens knows we'll certainly miss him. I always considered Key a purveyor of information and truth, and I'll never forget him. I wish I had known him longer. Presente.
Had mentioned 2 words that to me summarize how I understand Key, and it was passion and compassion. You couldn't get somebody, you can't find somebody more passionate about the struggle. We all saw that. And in the streets, whether it's in front of the cops or I'm sure in front of the boss, I didn't see him do it, but from what I've heard, he could have that intensity of passion. And yet, amongst the family, everybody in here was his family. You couldn't be more gentle, more light. That intensity translated into this great love and compassion. And the other aspect of someone with such a huge personality, such a huge loving personality, and yet so completely selfless. He pushed himself like crazy to do everything and anything possible and beyond, and he never pushed himself forward. He was always pushing others forward. And even, you can't be an organizer, a delegate, a union person, a communist activist without friction amongst the people you work with. It's just too intense. And along with it comes slights and all sorts of crap, and, we all know it. And Key would just brush it off. I used to think it was like when you come inside after the rain with your umbrella and all that bullshit and the interpersonal frictions. He'd come inside the house, he'd just shake the umbrella and let the water fall off and forget about it, and onto the struggle and keeping up the love no matter what. There's a zillion anecdotes. It's too late to go over a bunch of them. The innovation, he willed things into being. It sounds anti-Marxist, but he willed it, and, well, let's do it, and we'll figure out how we'll do it on the way. And whether it's rubber bands or string or masking tape, we'll put it together and it'll work. And it generally did, and if it didn't, you just keep trying and you stay later and it works. The essence of, well, I wouldn't say the essence, but one of the goals of communism, or means to what we want to achieve with communism, is collectivization, that the world's wealth should be the collective property of all. It's really the essence of what we believe. Well, Key collectivized himself. Everybody had a piece of Key. We all did. And he gave it freely. Anything he had, and most of all himself, his time, his concern, his energy. And probably more than anything else, and what he had a lot of, he didn't have a lot of things, and if he had them, everybody shared them. But what he did have was information. And now here's somebody who works for Time Inc., which is now with Warner and AOL. And what's the watchword now with these corporations? That the information property, is it called? Intellectual property, meaning information is property. Well, Key collectivized every bit of information that he had. And he would learn something because it was needed. And it was before I met him when he learned that just the writer stuff. And he went on to be a typesetter at the Clinton News. And because, we put out so much literature, you got to know how to type. You got to, you don't have to, but somebody does. And he learned how to letter banners, and he learned how to put together this and that and whatever, or a silk screening. He would just learn it, and the second he learned it, and maybe half before he completed what he learned it, he was teaching it and giving somebody the confidence to do it. I don't know if I was around the party, I was around, but working in the party for a month or two, he had taught me how to letter. You got to learn how to letter, a banner. And we had to do we didn't have to. The Black Panther Party asked us to do a 40-foot banner for one of their conventions, or it was actually something in Washington. So he says, "Oh, here's a brush. Here's some material. Here, go make a banner." And it was the essence that he had confidence that you could do it. He knew he could do it, and if he had to, he would do it. And we all know that whether it was 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning, you needed something needed to be done, he'd be there. He'd answer the call, he'd jump in the car, whichever shape it was, and get there if it needed to be done. But that selflessness, that giving, and yet all intertwined with the love that Alejandro talked about and that we all shared. I mentioned his death to a co-worker of mine, and she's from another culture, and she said, well, in her culture, they consider people live forever if they become a part of you, or they live on in you when they become a part of you. And Key has become a part of all of us, and many, many thousands more, if not millions around the world. And he will live on, and his struggle lives on.
I'm really going to miss him. He was a very good friend of mine, and the one thing that I agree with is, above all, he was really human. He treated me, just with a lot of love and respect, and it's something that I will always treasure. I think the first time that I met Key, I never really met him. I found myself on one of his videos. We had gone to Detroit to the newspaper strike with about 100,000 people showed up, and there I saw myself with our T-shirt, and our T-shirt was, "We are all newspaper workers." And then around 98, beginning of 98, I got involved with IAC and the Iraq Sanctions Challenge. And I started talking to Key. He saw my T-shirt. He said, "Oh, you were there in Detroit?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, I made some videos about it." I go, "You did?" "Yeah." And then he said, he gave me copies of them. And he said, "Well, you could put this out on public access television." And I did. And it was really great. We made a video. My local is Local 300. I'm a shop steward for the mail handlers. Larry Adams. We put together a town hall meeting in Jersey in the summer of 97, in August of 97, and we invited all the congressmen from around New Jersey. And so I spoke to Key and I said, this would be a good, video if we could, possibly PVN could film it. And so we did. And it turned into what we call Postal Workers Fight Privatization. And so far there's been hundreds and hundreds of copies of this been made by locals all throughout the country. It's becoming one of the leading organizing tapes regarding postal privatization. But during the editing of this tape, we were editing it, and there was one congressman, two congressmen showed up, and one of them I really disliked. And I said to Key, this guy, Menendez, okay, we got to cut him out. He's just a total shit. And Key said, no. He said, you know how hard it is to get two congressmen in one place without having their, hands in your back pocket? So we did it, and he was right. Last year we went to Kansas, to Leonard Peltier's conference on Leonard. And this one time when Key advice didn't work. I said, Key, they have this sweat lodge here at night, it's a native thing, and they have invited everyone to go. Well, I went, and I'm telling you, do not do it. The one thing that I have to really say was one of the funniest things that I just couldn't believe that Key did is when he went into that mosh pit. I'm calling him up on the telephone. I said, Key, where are you? Key, I'm in the mosh pit. I said, all right. Another time I called up Key when he was in Seattle, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't talk now. I'm being tear gassed. Well, that's Key. There's just one other thing. PVN is such a great organizing tool. It really is. We really need to try to expand it. I know that Key wanted the tapes to be turned over into digital. He wants all the old tapes turned over into digital CD, which is going to cost money, because he kept on telling stories about how these tapes deteriorate. And I think it's important that we try to save these tapes on CD. The sooner, the better. Okay. This is just like a strange thing. It's hard for me. I'm just talk about it. But during last year, we had the Millions for Mumia. And so I had tapes that I put on public access that they refused to play because they said I was trying to solicit a response. Okay? So I brought a lawsuit against him. Now, Key was really nervous about this. He did not like the idea. But I tried to explain to him that the public access is not the cable companies being nice to us. Okay, public access is the law. They have to give it to us. And that's the difference. And I think I got through to Key on the issue. Because I've never, since I filed my lawsuit against Cablevision, they have not given me one single problem. In fact, I can drop the tape off for a Saturday program at 4:30 in the afternoon, and they'll still run it on Saturday and Sunday. All right. There's just one other thing. See, I work from 3 o'clock to midnight, so I don't get to attend too many meetings. So me and Key would have meetings, late at night, okay, over at the IAC and cutting tapes, and those are really special times. I'm really going to miss him. And I'm going to miss, when you hang up from Key on the phone, he always used to say, Papa, always a pleasure.
I first met Comrade Key in the early 80s as a new comrade, and I was a rank-and-file newspaper union activist then, and began to consult with him and Comrade Milt on my work in the shops on the West Coast and around the attacks on the workers in the printing industry from the Chicago Tribune on and through all of the high-tech downsizing of the 70s and the 80s. And Comrade Key was always really supportive of my labor work for the party on the West Coast. When I was pushed into leadership during the set-up bankruptcy of the San Francisco Progress and during the '94 San Francisco newspaper strike, when I organized the Printers' Strike Preparation Committee and in coordinating the rank and file activists in their successful moves to play a leading role in the strike, which was won in 11 days after over 6 months preparation of the rank and file across the lines of 8 different union locals. And when I moved to New York, we began to work more closely together to organize support around the Detroit newspaper workers' strike that began in that year in '95. The Detroit rank and file wasn't prepared in advance and had to face extreme pressure and vicious attacks, and their strike forged a brand new layer of hardcore militants who continue as a strong presence in the movement in Detroit, and since the strike became a lockout, and I think there's still several hundred workers out, but these people have become activists for life around this. Since then, we have had many interesting discussions, especially around these militant struggles. I think it was Trotsky who observed that a strike teaches the workers how to fight and begins to give also a lesson that, it's a class enemy that we're up against. And we saw and experienced many examples of this in the labor work. From Key's leading work in support of the daily news strikers to Detroit, to the broadcasting engineers battling with ABC and Disney last year. He followed all of the media workers' battles and struggles very closely, always thinking of how to promote these struggles. He assisted them and all the Detroit people in all of their road trips here, and he was often seen by them there in Detroit videotaping their actions. His videos on their strike were this great organizing tool that was sent all around the country to organize support. And he spent many, many long hours talking with these activists in Detroit late into the night, many times about their fight and about all the events of the day that they were learning about as they went along. And I know every time he had racked up some frequent flyer miles, he'd be like, "Hey, Stephanie, I've got some frequent flyer miles. I think I'm going to Detroit," And our friends there, the newspaper strike activists, considered him to be part of their family as well, and they're planning a joint memorial with the party in Detroit. Sister and Detroit printer Barb Ingalls put out the Action Center statement on the email hotline that goes to their leading activist and support network organizers, prefaced by the following short comment. To this tribute, I can only add that the Detroit newspaper workers met Key when he made our struggle his business. His sweet smile and delighted giggle was the kind face on a formidable warrior who knew no fear and would brook no injustice. We will send folks to New York City for the memorial, but I'm sure his many friends in Detroit will have one for him here. It's impossible to imagine, but I guess it's true. Key was like a great rock for those of us in the labor work, both in the party and in the movement. And there's this long list of local, loyal Detroit supporters that I've just begun to start calling with the news of our loss and to invite them to the memorial. And as the president of the local retired printers club, Angelo DeSalvo, said to me yesterday, I can't believe he's gone. He was so active. Everywhere I went, Key was there. Key Martin Presente.
For Local 169 of Unite on 14th Street. I've known Key for approximately 17 years, and out of my hazy past, I first met him when I was at Cornell, and Key used to hang there for whatever reason, and of the people that I remember, Key shines through. Over the years, I've seen him at demonstrations with his camera, without his camera. Every so often, we'd have a chance to talk, and it was a pleasant surprise that when I took a job at Local 169 over a year and a half ago, that Key was very tight with my boss, Ernesto Joffre. So I got to see Key more and more. And because we're a little local, we have to use everyone else's resources as well as our own. And through Key and Milt and the struggles that we've had involving the Mexican workers who are in the green groceries on the Lower East Side, working 12 to 16 hours a day for less than minimum pay, no overtime. The Blake and Todd workers who were fired for trying to form a union, Mexican undocumented immigrants, and the African workers who struggled to get a first contract through the retail store workers just recently. They all came to us through our fight that Key helped us with. when we did our strike at Blake and Todd, the Workers' World Party, Key and Milt in particular, sent us a number of Workers' World Party members to help us on our strike. I see Charlie's still here, Tony, Judy, and Carlos all worked on our lines, and we thank you for that. We'll remember Key as a gentleman. I heard a lot of stories today about him, but I remember him as a gentleman and someone who I saw on the street quite often on 14th Street. He was a fixture there. I'm sorry this has happened. On behalf of the members, the officers, and the staff of Local 169, our condolences to his family, his comrades, and friends. Thank you.
Sent in statements of solidarity, in remembrance of Key. And we didn't have time to read them tonight, but we will be circulating those, through the correspondence and in the paper. And we also heard from a member of one of the leaders of the African National Congress as well. So we will be circulating those and also probably reading a number of them at the public memorial. Is Paul Wilcox here? No. Did he leave? Okay. So the next three speakers we have are Jerry, Kathy, and Artie.
I just have two really quick things I want to say. The first thing is that at Tuesday nights, last Tuesday night's 14th Street Volunteers meeting, it was really hard, I think, for a lot of folks to be there who knew Key. It's almost this feeling like he was going to walk around the corner at any minute or something. And it was just kind of a hard feeling. But as the meeting got going, there were a number of new people, new faces at the meeting that night. And I happened to be privileged to be sitting at a table stuffing envelopes with two very young people who are like totally new to the movement, like their first day in the movement. And hearing about Key just sort of like got them talking and asking questions about the struggle, about, Sharon Eolis was telling them about Yoff, and they got them asking questions, and what you were saying, Fred, about how, Sam, said we got to have this younger guy, because he'll have like appeal to the youth in the movement. Well, even today, as of last Tuesday, Key's work has an appeal to young people, and I think that we should keep talking about him, because I think there's a lot of people that will want to know about him who don't even know about him right now. And the other thing that I want to say is when I first, heard the phone call, I thought about you, Johnny, first, and I started slowly think about, all the other comrades who have a long history with Key, unlike myself, who, I hardly know him at all. And I just wanted to express my condolences and my solidarity with your loss. And I think I may very well speak for other young comrades who didn't know him that well, that, we're here for you. We're a shoulder to lean on, if it's hard to, come in the office every day and, he's not here, just remember, that's what we're all here for, pull together in the hard times as well as the, victory times. So, Key Martin Presente.
With people who were staying over for the conference. I remember being behind a couch and my feet sticking over, and people tripping over the feet as they were trying to go by to the bathroom. He just opened the air. Anything that he had was available for any other comrade. After the conference was over, I decided to stay on for a while. It's still, I guess it's about 40 years. Key let me stay at his apartment. I moved from the floor up to the couch. And I'm not sure how long it was. It probably was about 6 months. It's hard to say because there was no pressure to move out. He didn't care. If you were a comrade and you needed a place to stay, He didn't care. If he had something to share, if it was food, if it was car fare, whatever it is, he didn't care. So I was just there until I found a job and found an apartment. I don't know exactly how long it was. So that was the caring side of Key just was so amazing. And then, of course, what I learned after being there for a while was his ability, as has been said, to inspire everyone to a spirit of combativeness. I mean, whether it was just an individual who was staying with them or whether it was a whole group of people, he could just inspire you to want to take on the struggle. And then, of course, his unending activism. I mean, very few people could keep up with his constant energy and always wanted to be on the street and ready to be on the street no matter what. And he'd have it so fixed as he knew he had to get out, he wouldn't have time to cook and everything. So going back to the flank steaks or something, he'd cook up a huge amount of these steaks, all at one time, and put them in this gigantic plastic bag, cut up, ready to go. So if you had to go on a demonstration, you'd run over to the refrigerator and you'd grab a piece of flank steak and you'd run out the door. You didn't have to stop to cook. And it was like this on the demonstrations too, because we had, at first Yoff just had a handful of people around Yoff, and of course Key became known as such a militant fighter and known throughout the movement. But when it became time, because it was a collective leadership, it was a group, all together, and the media kept hounding people. Who's your spokesperson? Who's the chairperson? What chairperson? It was not really, structured. It was just we were out there to be active, and somebody said Key, I think, Key, and he said, me? You want me to be okay. But he was so modest, he didn't want individual, attention. He was just someone that was in the struggle as far as he was concerned. But he became known very well. Then the movement started to grow, and the question was how to get the demonstrations moving quickly, and he was interested in the practical things, how to make the signs. I mean, the traditional organizations had, you take it for granted now, signs and banners. They had signs printed by some professionals, or maybe some people would have magic markers, but he would work on these techniques, finding certain pens or things where you could make signs in a split second, so you could be, right out the door. And then as the movement got bigger, the signs weren't enough. So banners, a comrade mentioned. I think, questions like, well, the cops said you couldn't use wooden sticks. So I think it was Key who figured out this technique. Well, we found hollow cardboard poles. You put the banners on the cardboard poles. It's not sticks, and got around it. And the banners, of course, became so well known throughout the whole movement. And still, the party still makes banners for people. It just was a practical way of getting the word out. And then figuring out the slogans and figuring out how to work with the youth movement that was coming into the streets at the time that really didn't care much about theory. They wanted to be rebellious. They wanted to show opposition to the system. What the slogans were, they really weren't exactly that, but they wanted some structure to come out and have a demonstration. If there were people there with signs, if there were people there with banners, then there would be a demonstration, and Yoff would be leading it, and then an organization that brought a lot of different groups together called the Coalition for an Anti-Imperialist Movement in about 1968. Drew a lot of groups together that some of the traditional left didn't want to work with. They were too militant or too out in front. A group that would carry the NLF flag, the Coalition to Aid the National Liberation Front, carry what was called the Viet Cong flag to demonstrations. Other groups said, no, we don't want that. We said, welcome, join us, let's have a coalition together. Youth that called themselves yippies, various kinds of street people that just wanted to be out there and fight. And how to take the slogans and make them militant and still have the politics. There was a demonstration against something called the Diamond Ball in '68, which was a gathering of all these rich, and the COAIM, Coalition for an Anti-Imperialist Movement, renamed it the Festival of the Vultures. And the signs that we had before, I think it was Key probably developed the slogan, big firms get rich, GIs die, some of the major ones that were used in the movement. But he said, well, let's spice it up a little bit. What do we do for this demonstration? So it became billionaires profit off GI's blood. and that was carried on these banners right into the streets. People took the streets, and then 1,000 people came out later that year for a demonstration against Humphrey, who was vice president, the second war criminal. Went right into the street in front of the Waldorf, just right into the traffic, filled the streets, made it almost impossible for the cops. And at the end of all these rallies, and the one that was mentioned at Washington Square Park, and at the end of all these rallies, there would be at the end of these demonstrations, spontaneous rallies where people would jump up and speak. And of course, it would be Key inspiring the crowd again. And so for all these decades, he was still like that. After almost 40 years in the party, he was still the person I remembered, the youthful activist who could inspire anybody to a spirit of combativeness, who was caring about all comrades, and still that same spirit of struggle and activism that never slowed down. So Key Martin lived like him.
We were organizing a contingent for Richard Nixon's second inauguration. It was a contingent, the Sign the Treaty Now coalition, demanding that the U.S. sign a treaty, the one that had been being discussed forever in Paris, and end that war in Vietnam. And after many intense weeks, Key told the comrades in Washington they could admit me. So I've been here since. In 1986, I got a job in New York at Time Inc., and that's what I wanted to talk about tonight, where, as you've heard, Key was the unit chair of the Newspaper Guild, representing about 1,200 workers in those days before cutbacks and layoffs. My first job at Time was in what I quickly learned was the notorious Impact Center. This was about the worst place I ever worked. It had been set up by Time to do its state-of-the-art electronic engraving. It was a 24/7 operation. Before I began working there, conditions had been so awful that Key, along with Keith Pavlik and Janet Miller, who were working in the Impact Center, Key wasn't, but the other two were, had already conducted a successful union drive. Well, it was almost successful because it took another 5 years after winning union recognition to get the company to actually sign a contract. I soon decided shift work was not for me. So on my days off, I went to school and got a library degree. And then I got a job in the Time Inc. library, where we still had shift work, but not quite as much. And there were over 80 employees at the time. I later learned that Key had put in a good word for me, helped me get that job. So for the first time, I had a union job, and so I got active in the union. And I ended up being the shop steward in the library and co-chairing some bargaining committees and really getting an education on that front. But this is where I saw Key in action in the union setting. Time was a kind of a strange company. For years, management had been apparently guided by the philosophy that if they were good to at least some of the workers, they could keep a happy workforce, willing to do weekends and other extra duty. But by this time, management was just taking advantage of any goodwill they had saved up. So Key conducted a campaign to expose this, saying that the company was in the hands of the bean counters, the people who read the bottom line very carefully. And it certainly was true. He was very good at characterizing management as the capitalist swine they were, and he took the union members through the merger with Warner with their eyes open. Layoffs became standard operating procedure, and every contract negotiation included improvements in severance packages, which Key characterized as tin parachutes. They were pale reflections of the golden parachutes that management gave each other. But it was still something, and it still meant that it cost the company, they had to think about it when they laid off 20 or 30 or 40 people. Every contract also focused on raising the pay and benefits of the lowest paid and the part-time workers. And there were ongoing efforts to make the company hire African Americans as reporters, writers, and librarians, and not only in the lower paying positions. Once during negotiations, we got a lot of publicity for the fact that this media-conscious, multi-billion-dollar company had over 100 workers making so little that they qualified for food stamps. Some contract negotiations lasted for months and months. How many lunches did we have to spend in that airless, windowless office going over what we were going to get from management? When we needed to make it clear that we spoke for the broad membership, we'd go and organize our co-workers to come and physically line up behind us and stare at management across the table. The heart of the union work, though, was enforcing whatever contract we had won. Key knew these contracts to the most minute detail, naturally better than the revolving door occupants of labor relations. It was most interesting and inspiring to see Key work on these grievances. He would really listen to what a worker would say, explaining what had happened and what the problem was. And then he would just take this and accurately and quickly and skillfully work it into a grievance, which labor relations would then have to deal with. And he was very creative in proposing solutions for management. He would get management to agree to give second chances to workers who had made a mistake that the boss really wanted to fire them for. And he would get training for workers who weren't working very well because they weren't comfortable with the technology. He was determined to get the best deal for people, even if all that he could do was get a severance package for a worker that was fired with cause. The active union members at time made up a small group of good and concerned people who wanted to make where we worked a more just and rewarding place to spend our working lives. He set high standards for commitment to these ends, but was always gracious and settling for whatever we were willing to give. Giving his time and energy to the union work wasn't any easier for Key than for the rest of us. He still had to work almost full time. He had to scramble to make ends meet. He had a family beyond the union that he wanted to be with, and he was active in Workers' World Party. His health was often problematic, but for Key, a health-related period of disability with time off from the job was an opportunity to do more work. He continued to type using braces and arm rests and painkillers when his repetitive stress injury was at its most painful. And he went everywhere, even when his asthma was really bad. Remember that portable machine he used to carry with him in order to be able to breathe better? He seemed to be completely clear and comfortable with whatever goals he had in his life for himself and for the world. Although building socialism, one contract at a time, or even one grievance at a time, was not an efficient use of his time and his considerable skills, he did it with grace and warmth and kindness and good nature and good humor. He was a great trade unionist, well loved and respected within the Time Life building as well as in the broader union movement. And he was a generous person, a good comrade. And he had an endless, and some might say bottomless, supply of puns and clever turns of phrase to educate on the class struggle. Key Martin Presente.
Well, comrades and friends, some of you were very lucky than us. We young. We just started being activists. And us, we just even started to meet some of you. My influence is not the Pope. My influence is not the President of the United States. My influence was on Key Martin. Key Martin was such a comrade and a friend excuse me, a friend more like a parent, someone that you can go to. Excuse me. You know, when you go to see your parent, you feel free. You tell him your problem, and he will try to give you a solution, or he will try to give you some advice. He will tell you what to do. He will even tell you how to do it. For Kima, there was no time to reach him. There was no place to reach him. Any place you see him, anytime you see him, even if you can't reach him, but you can call him at any time and ask him anything that you have as a problem, he's always there to listen. And he's always there to tell you and give you an advice. So some of you comrades was very lucky to spend so many years with him. But I did not. And that struck me so bad. Nobody ever been on so many demonstrations as a key Martin. Nobody ever been on so many picket lines as a key Martin. They are, but he's one of the first. Key Martin, the timing was not part of his thinking. He will walk when he's strong, and he will stop when he's tired. And he will make sure things are done. His dream was to see a young black man to stand and speak for his right. Key Martin was not white, he was black. There was nobody who knows the history of Harlem as a Key Martin. Nobody knows the struggle for black liberation as a Key Martin. Nobody knows the struggle of colonialism in Africa as Key Martin. Nobody knows places and names of all these oppressors on the planet as a Key Martin. Key Martin traveled to Africa for the last few times already to help and the people with AIDS to overcome the neo-colonialism there and everything going on over there. Why? Is it because you have more money than everybody else here on the planet? Is it because you have more money than the IMF? Because you have more money than the World Bank? Because you have more money than the US government? No. It was his heart to see a human being having a life that he deserved. I am an African, and I'm proud to be one. And meeting someone like Key, it makes me realize no matter what they do to all mankind, especially black and oppressed people, there will always be one person who's going to rise and try to save that person. I have the honor to work there will always be one person who's going to rise and try to save that person. I have the honor